When people talk about cars that didn't just enter the automotive world, but completely rewrote the rules, the conversation eventually circles back to the 1989 Nissan Skyline GT-R, the R32. What makes this car so fascinating is that it didn't burst onto the scene with the loud swagger of an American muscle car or the flamboyant curves of an Italian exotic. It arrived quietly, almost politely, like a student walking into a classroom, only for everyone to realize moments later that this student was a prodigy. But the moment people understood what Nissan had actually built, everything changed. Japan was in the middle of a technological renaissance, a time when electronics were evolving faster than anyone could keep track of, and Nissan decided to channel that energy into a single purpose: to create a car so advanced, so perfectly engineered, that it wouldn't just win races, it would erase the concept of competition altogether. And from that mission came the R32 GT-R, a car that didn't ask for the crown. It simply reached out and took it. What made the R32 so shocking was how different its approach was from the muscle cars and European sports machines dominating attention at the time. Those cars won through brute force or dramatic styling, but Nissan built something surgical. The R32 didn't look wild, it didn't sound outrageous, and it didn't rely on exaggerated bodywork to sell itself. Instead, it looked like a restrained, almost simple coupe: sharp lines, clean profile, no wasted shapes. But under that calm exterior was a level of engineering that felt alien to the late 1980s. Nissan wasn't chasing trends. They were building a weapon. At the core of that weapon was the RB26DETT, a twin-turbo straight-six that didn't need to shout to prove its strength. Nissan officially claimed 276 horsepower because that was the limit Japan's manufacturers agreed not to exceed on paper. But anyone who drove the car knew the truth. The engine was healthier than Nissan admitted, with a deep well of hidden potential that tuners would later unleash to numbers far beyond anything the era had prepared for. And unlike big, temperamental engines of the time, the RB26 didn't try to intimidate the driver. It felt disciplined, composed, ready to follow commands with an almost eerie precision. But that precision only made sense when paired with the part of the car that changed everything: ATTESA E-TS, one of the first truly intelligent all-wheel drive systems in a production performance car. While other vehicles of the era still treated AWD as a stability feature, the R32 used it as a weapon, shifting power between the axles in milliseconds based on real-time data to maximize grip. It didn't react to the road, it anticipated it. Drivers at the time described it as something impossible to explain: the feeling that the car understood the situation before they did. And just to make sure the R32 had no weaknesses, Nissan added Super HICAS, a four-wheel steering system that subtly adjusted the rear wheels during high-speed maneuvers, making the car corner with a sharpness that seemed to defy physics. What resulted wasn't just a fast car, it was a phenomenon. A machine so far ahead of its time that when it entered Group A racing, it didn't just win, it dominated so mercilessly that officials had to rewrite rules to keep the sport alive. It crushed the Australian Touring Car Championship so completely that fans and competitors started calling it Godzilla, a monster from Japan that nobody could stop. The nickname stuck because it felt right. The R32 behaved less like a car and more like a creature, silent when calm, terrifying when awakened. But the most interesting part of all is how the R32's personality contradicts its reputation. You look at it expecting something wild, something loud and aggressive, but what you get instead is a kind of disciplined confidence. The car drives like it has nothing to prove. It doesn't shake, it doesn't roar unnecessarily, it doesn't try to scare you. It simply does exactly what you ask of it, only better. And that paradox, a monster with perfect manners, is what begins to reveal the deeper story behind why this car became a legend. And once you understand the technology inside the R32 GT-R, the next part of the story becomes almost unbelievable. Because when Nissan finally unleashed this car onto the racetrack, it didn't simply perform well. It annihilated everything in front of it. The R32 walked into Group A racing the way someone walks into a room already knowing the outcome of every conversation. It wasn't arrogant, it was inevitable. The combination of the RB26D ETT's smooth, unbreakable power delivery and the ATTESA system's uncanny traction meant the GT-R could accelerate out of corners with a violence that other cars physically couldn't match. Drivers described the experience of competing against it as almost demoralizing, like watching someone play a video game with the difficulty turned down while everyone else struggled to stay alive. The GT-R didn't just win races. It strung together a streak of victories that turned it into something closer to a myth than a machine. In Australia, things became even more dramatic. The GT-R crushed the Touring Car Championship so decisively that officials eventually rewrote the rules to slow it down. Fans nicknamed it Godzilla because it felt like the only way to describe a monster that came out of Japan and destroyed everything in sight. It wasn't a cute nickname. It was a warning. People weren't watching a competitor, they were watching a force. And the real irony is that Nissan didn't initially build the car for global legend status. They built it for one specific purpose: dominance in Group A. The road car existed only because racing rules required it. That means every R32 GT-R sitting in a driveway today is, at its core, a detuned race car disguised as a street-legal coupe. But the dominance on the track is only half the story, because something else, unexpected and world-changing, was growing in the background. Tuners were discovering that the RB26 engine was not just strong, it was absurdly overbuilt. Nissan engineered the motor with a level of structural integrity that bordered on excessive, likely anticipating far more power than the regulations allowed. So when tuners began increasing boost and modifying fuel delivery, they realized the engine didn't complain. It didn't knock, it didn't crack, it didn't give up. It absorbed horsepower like a bottomless well. 300 horsepower became 400, 4 became 5, 5 became 8, and eventually people were extracting 4-digit numbers from engines that still felt stable, controlled, civilized. The GT-R wasn't just powerful, it was limitless, and that changed the entire culture around Japanese performance cars. Driving an R32 today feels nothing like driving a car from the late 1980s. Most cars of that era have quirks, hesitations, funny little delays in their responses. The GT-R doesn't. Everything it does feels intentional, decisive, almost modern. The engine's power delivery is smooth but forceful, the turbos spool with quiet confidence, and the ATTESA system works underneath you like a second brain, constantly evaluating what the car needs before you even know you're asking for it. There's a moment in a corner, every GT-R owner talks about this, where you begin to turn in and expect the weight to cause understeer because that's what should happen. But instead, the car pivots, tightens, and grips as if the laws of physics have been politely asked to step aside. And then, as you accelerate out, the car just digs in and goes, like it's launching itself off an invisible rail. You don't feel the system working. You feel the result, a supernatural smoothness that makes you believe you're a better driver than you actually are. And despite all of this sophistication, there's still something beautifully analog about the R32. The steering still talks to you through the wheel, the chassis still sends vibrations through the floor, and the turbos still have that gentle inhaling sound before they deliver the surge. It's not a digital experience. It's a mechanical conversation enhanced through intelligence. It's the perfect middle ground between the rawness of older performance cars and the precision of modern ones. That balance is part of why the R32 became a kind of blueprint for performance engineering in the decades that followed. Every car company eventually had to respond to what Nissan had done, whether they admitted it or not. But what truly cements the R32 GT-R as an icon is the way it changed the world beyond the racetrack. It ignited an entire generation of car culture. It became the centerpiece of tuning scenes in Japan, Australia, the UK, and later the United States. It inspired video games, movies, and the imaginations of millions of enthusiasts who had never even seen one in person. And for years, especially in America, the R32 had this aura of forbidden fruit because of import restrictions. People could only experience it through magazines, grainy videos, or pixelated screenshots from early racing games. The car existed out of reach, which only intensified its legend. When the first legal imports finally arrived after the 25-year rule lifted, It felt like a moment of cultural correction, a generation finally meeting the machine that shaped its dreams. And maybe that's the most powerful part of the R32's legacy. It wasn't just a great car for its time. It was a car that arrived too early for the world, a glimpse of what performance would eventually become. The way it blended intelligence, stability, and raw potential became the foundation of modern high-performance engineering. It didn't roar its achievements, it quietly demonstrated them. And in doing so, it became one of the most respected, studied, admired, and mythologized cars ever built. A machine that didn't rely on intimidation or theatrics because it didn't need to. It simply performed so perfectly that the world had no choice but to notice.